This video accompanies biogeography, the virtual field trips, and it's a site overview. Today we're going to Puckeys Estate Reserve. This reserve is in North Wollongong. It's on Squires Way and you can enter via a boardwalk. So it's very easy to access. You can visit there yourself. It's open to the public and the nearest train station is Fairy Meadow. It's an interesting site because there are quite a few different vegetation communities in a small area, including some wetland vegetation. And we'll be looking at two main sort of transects, one from the beach into the forest and one from the creek back into the forest. So our main area of interest is this island-like piece of land that you can see in front of you there. We're interested in going from this creek. You can just about see the bridge going over there towards the sea, and then again from the ocean and the beach back into the trees. So we have fresh water on the left there and ocean and things like ocean spray on the right. So you might like to think about what other kinds of gradients are also going to be happening on this site. This tree that you can see rising right above all the others is an introduced species called the radiator pine. And if you attempt to walk from the creek across to the sea, you'll come across it. It's got a very wide trunk. It's an introduced species, but it hasn't been removed because it's got quite a heritage value. There are also mangroves at this site on the edges of the fresh water. And a tree we'll talk a lot about is the casuarina, also found in the fresh water. So if we walk along the boardwalk here from the entrance, we've got an endangered rainforest patch on the left and the casuarinas with quite wet roots on the right. You can see here how wet the ground is for the casuarina, and that's tidal, so that's going to come up quite a bit higher. So you can tell from that the roots must be adapted for inundation because they're going to get waterlogged. This swamp oak floodplain forest on the left has the swamp oak, casuarina, glauca, a paperbark called melaleuca, and you can see there it has a lot of vines. One of the main ones is the snake vine Stephania japonica, and there's another one called the common silk pod. If you walk along there, there's a nice explanation. We'll cross over the creek now. We've got the Fairy Creek on the right and Taroji Arm on the left. You can see a little bit more clearly the mangrove bushes on the left and the right. And you might be able to see there's a range of rushes in this area. A common one is the sea rush, juncus. And the taller trees forming a little ring there behind the mangroves are the casuarinas. Taking a closer look at the mangrove, the species here is the grey mangrove. It's got leathery pointed leaves with a grey underside. And the fruits you can just about make out there are yellow capsules. There's an interesting little patch of land just the other side of the bridge. It's a little patch of high dune littoral rainforest. It forms in protected swales and depressions behind sand dunes all along the coast. In this case, it's protected by dunes and the remains of a house. So the emergent canopy is eucalyptus botryoides, and also the swamp mahogany. And the mid canopy consists of rainforest plants like Pittosporum and lily-pilly. But an important species here is also the red ash, which is that tree with the pale trunk, Alphatonia excelsa. We look now towards the north. You've got the path in the middle there, and the freshwater creek, Taroji Arm, on the left. With that's right for wetland and flood forest type vegetation, things like swamp oaks and mangroves and rushes. And moving from the right of the path towards the beach and the ocean is a shrubland and forest with a range of different species, such as Eucalyptus banksia and tea tree. And you can see there that the undercover is quite green. The ground cover is quite green. There are a lot of weeds there and grasses as well. We'll take a closer look at the swamp oak. You can see there the fruits are quite hard, like little nuts, and the leaves are thin and needle-like. The bark has a sort of like a crazed texture. This particular little group of trees also has some dark patches on it, which are moss. In the middle of the patch, if we walked from that path over towards the radiator pine and the beach, there's an interesting stand of senescing coast tea trees. You can see the trunks there. They're very tall, and if you actually were able to visit there, you'd see that a lot of the trunks are actually falling over there. So probably those all grew together. They're a similar age and they're reaching the end of their life. But the important species here is the Eucalyptus botryoides, which you can see there has a thick fibrous bark with vertical burrows. Its common name is the Bangalay. And another very common eucalyptus on this site is the swamp mahogany, which is similar but has a spongy and red-brown bark. There are lots of other species to see. Some of them have labels, so if you visit there yourself, that makes it nice and easy. There's a coffee bush, hard to see among all the other trees, and a cheese bush. This is an interesting tree. It's called the coral tree, that one with the smooth bark there. It usually has quite a few more leaves. It's got like big heart-shaped leaves, and it has quite a nice orange, bright orange flower, a bit sort of lipstick shape when it's flowering. It's actually an introduced tree. Many farmers planted them for shade. It's considered a weed. Now we'll take a look at the other part of the site, from the beach into the trees, up over the dunes. I'll be mentioning a house quite a bit, and it's just about there. So we're around now on the beach side of the site. If we look at the vegetation first, we've got these pioneer species, which are the first ones to grow. They're very ground-hugging and just quite low, that manage to grow on the very loose sand. Then we have at the front of the dune some short shrubs, and at the back, going up the hill there from that path, are the taller trees. So if we think about some of the environmental gradients that are occurring here, without the shade of taller vegetation, the beach side is a lot more light. There's going to be a lot of exposure to light. And there's also spray from the sea and salinity. All the plants here on the beach side have to be adapted to much higher wind exposure. On the other hand, moving up the bank from the pioneer species up to the tall trees, if you walked up that path and looked to the left and the right, you would find that gradually the amount of organic matter in the soil would increase. That's because as the plants that are growing die, they leave their leaf remains and the other associated organisms in the soil, so it gradually builds up. Here's the high tide mark, where we see what we call pioneer plants, the first ones to manage to grow in this difficult spot. This is a beach sand spinifex community. On this particular beach, it's quite simple. We'll have a look at some of the species. This is an introduced species called the sea rocket. Take a closer look there. You can see that its leaves are quite succulent, and that's how it survives this very drying environment, very harsh environment. The main one here is the spinifex grass. The way it survives this is by having very tough leaves, and it also has runners that run from plant to plant, which help stabilize the soil. And at the back there, the coastal banksias. We'll take a closer look at those trees. At the tallest trees here at the back are the coastal banksias, and at the front is the coastal tea tree with the little tiny leaves. These banksias have quite beautiful yellow inflorescences. That's a name for a group of flowers, which will develop into hard woody fruit. At the top of that path that we saw before is the house site. So it's quite disturbed. There was a house here. There are now just the ruins. You can just about see the concrete there that formed the foundations. And this disturbance has sort of opened the site up for quite a few weeds. There's also an old salt works and lots of evidence of previous buildings. Other species of note include the Mexican fan palm, Washingtonia robusta, which is emerging there out of the canopy. That's an introduced species as well. Taking a look now at some of the ground cover, we've got mat rush, which you'll see in a lot of different sites because it's so adaptable. And that fleshy plant at the front, in front of the mat rush, is warrigal greens, which are actually edible. You can cook them. Yeah, they're not bad. Just behind the mat rush is a weed called asparagus fern. And here's a closer look at the bark of a tea tree. It has these small, very tough leaves again, and a twisted bark and trunk. And that's a big bush of asparagus fern at the back there. It's quite a problem. So overall, this site is quite disturbed. There are quite a bit of evidence of weeds and previous buildings. It's used by people walking and running. It's close to the city, but it is gradually being restored. There's a very active bush care group here, which are gradually restoring the vegetation communities to what they were before and removing quite a few of the weeds.